So now I'd like to quickly just go over different things that were done in the actual lab report in terms of text and writing. I'm just going to give you a sample marking sheet that I've provided here. So your title wants to be a clear, explanatory description of your experiment. It needs to explain your experiment. It can't be something simple like Lab 2 or studying of height in plant forest. It needs to actually be descriptive, and in some cases it can be quite long, but I don't want it also in the same sense to be a paragraph long. It should be one concise sentence. So try to put a little bit of effort into thinking of a sentence that best describes your entire lab report. Now your abstract is a concise summary of the lab report. There's a max on it of 300 words, but surely you probably shouldn't be getting that high. Picture each sentence to represent one section of your lab report. So you want one sentence to represent your introduction, one sentence to represent your methods, one sentence for your results, one sentence for your discussion, and that should be pretty much it. You also want a topic sentence introducing the whole thing, so don't just immediately talk about your methodology. And you also want a concluding sentence adding in implications. Treat it like a proper paragraph format and include those 4 sentences in the middle, and you should be fine. Your introduction needs to show a main concept. You can't specifically talk about your lab report and what it was testing. It actually needs to picture the broader picture. So if you're comparing disturbed versus grassland, you're going to want to say disturbed habitats are affecting the world, etc. Something to that extent. You set the context of the study, and then you've described the problem. Again, it's very concise. You're not writing much, but you still need to introduce the concept and make it relate to your paper. And then you actually put in your hypothesis and predictions, and they have to be presented clearly enough that I can notice that they're hypotheses and predictions. If you do not put in your hypotheses and predictions, I'm not sure what you're doing, and it doesn't bode well for you, and you can lose marks. Methods. Clear description of what you've done. Like I said, if you didn't test a specific thing, you don't need to put it in, but you do need to describe what you did do. So include things like you identified plants, you measured the height, you used transect tape, there are different sites we went to, there are different locations. If you don't know their names, just put there were three disturbed, disturbed, a grassland, and a forest area on York University campus in Canada. Be descriptive as you can. You don't need to, again, write a giant paragraph, but you can't leave out key details like the locations that you visited, the methods that you use, i.e., did you use transect? Did you use quadrats? Organization of the data, if you did any manipulations to it. At this point, you haven't done anything yet, but in subsequent labs, maybe you will. And of course, you have to put in your stats. You have to put in, I did this stats test to prove this trend. Put in something to that effect. I did a t-test to test the difference between two populations of species and their heights. Something like that. Your results is a clear presentation in words of your main findings. They have to support your figure, but they also should stand independently from your figure. You should cite your figure. That's also key. If you don't have figure 1 represented in your text, then you haven't properly cited your figure and you're not presenting your data appropriately. And of course, you also want to incorporate your stats. So your p-value, p equals 0.0 whatever. Perfect. Your figure has to be properly formatted. You have to have a graph that makes sense. If your graph does not make sense, something has gone wrong. Try to think about it. Error bars, you need those. If you're doing a correlation, you might want to consider a regression line, but of course, I'm not going to deem that necessary. And it has to be formatted appropriately. Don't put titles in your figures, please. You have your axis label, so I know what each axis represents, and I don't want crazy amount of lines or anything unnecessary presented in the middle. Don't go too crazy with colors or anything like that. Please just try to keep it as simple as possible. Discussion. So your first sentence is probably going to explain what this whole paper found. What was the big punchline for the whole paper? And then you want to relate that to the big picture. How is that related? How do your hypotheses, predictions support or reject? Are they supported? Are they rejected? What's the meanings of these findings? What conclusions can you draw from it? Simple as that. It should be very short, but you should also provide a link to the literature. This is where you cite papers and you say this paper found similar things, or this paper found something different, or it's because of this this thing is cited by this person. that we saw what we saw. And lastly, your citations, all references have to be cited in text. Please don't use numbers. So it's going to be John et al. 2013, something to that effect. For those of you that are not familiar, it's pretty much oikos formatting, which means last name, first name in with abbreviated, and then the other author, year. Title of the book with the journal at the end, then the journal issue number, and then the page numbers. You don't need to italicize anything in this citation at all. The only thing you need to italicize would be a Latin name, but you don't even need to do that. So please don't italicize or bold or do any crazy formatting. Don't put the year in brackets. For names longer than 3, you put et al. You should know that. And don't italicize the et al. It's also not necessary. And that should be it. You don't even need the secondary issue number. This is the formatting that you should have. It's in your lab manual if you're unfamiliar with it. It's also the same formatting for oikos, and you do need a minimum of 3 citations. So the last little bit I want to cover is some general comments on labs that I like to discuss. So here are some common issues that might have come up that might be better if you didn't do them in the future, more or less. So the first one is do not personify nature. Plants do not decide to grow or wish to be taller. They are not sentient and they don't have feelings. They simply grow or do not grow. It's also better if you don't refer to plants as they or their or anything to that effect. Try not to personify. Always refer to the species with its name. It just sounds awkward to consistently say the plant wishes to be taller, or it would have grown taller if it could, but it decided not to because the resources weren't there. That's not the instance. What happens is a plant is unable to grow because resources were limiting. Simple as that. It also makes your sentence a lot shorter and makes more sense. No citations in the abstract, and all citations should be author year. I already explained that. There's no comma or any other form of punctuation between this author year delineation unless it's et al. So it's simply John 2013. If it's et al, then it's John et al. 2013, and if it's 2 authors, then it's John and Smith 2013. Use of commas, apostrophes, and all other punctuation. Please actually use them. Sometimes you guys use them too much. In other instances, you don't use them at all. So please know appropriately when to put them. Periods go at the ends of sentences, etc. There's a common expression that goes around right now. Let's eat, Grandpa means to share an enjoyable meal with your grandfather, whereas let's eat, Grandpa is cannibalism. So try to keep your punctuation to the best of your ability. Next bit. Please do not use big words unless you know how to use them. Seeing the same sentence in simpler text is better than struggling through what looks like a terms of use contract. Sometimes you guys input words, but I'm kind of unsure whether or not you know how to use them, and it actually ends up harming you because you try to seem like you want to use this word, but it doesn't fit in the sentence, and it's very awkward, and it would have been much better off even if you just dumbed it down to something much more simplistic. It's actually much better, so please just try to do that in the future. Numbers, this is a bit more of a nitpicking thing, but it's not a big deal. Obviously, I didn't take marks off for something like this, but it's better for your own knowledge. Numbers less than 10, you spell out. So 9, 8, obviously. Anything like that, you actually write out the word. Numbers greater than 11, you write as digits. Pretty simple as that. Cut out fluff words. The second sampling method that was conducted was using quadrats of 1 meter by 1 meter. This whole sentence, as long as beautiful as it is, can be reduced to a quadrat. 1 meter squared sampling was used. This whole 1 meter by 1 meter seems like you're just kind of like trying to fill in words, and it's totally unnecessary. Try to minimize your sentences. The reason why we made these lab reports so short as previous years is because we want you to concise your work and actually put more effort into making one paragraph really good than writing out 3 or 4 pages of basically useless jargon. So the fact that we have shorter lab reports so that you can actually make them better. I already mentioned this. If your graph does not make sense, then it might be wrong. If you're looking at it and your x and your y, it doesn't make sense that they're together, then there might be a reason why it doesn't make sense. Maybe your question isn't being answered by this figure, so try to rethink it. What are other options? What other figures? Do not use contractions, i.e., don't, can't, won't, and please don't use slang, woulda, shoulda, bits like that. Not the best to put in a formal lab report. Your lab report should be double spaced. It makes it a lot easier to read, and it's what the formatting calls for. Times New Roman or Arial. I mentioned this in class. Nothing crazy like Comic Sans or any other fonts. Please also make sure that these fonts stay throughout your lab report. Some of you start off Times New Roman and then the default of Word, which I think is Calibri. It switches back and you don't notice, and now I'm looking at lab report and there's 3 different fonts throughout, and it shows that you didn't actually put any effort into looking over your lab report, because even a quick glance you would have seen that you have 2 or 3 very distinct fonts. So please look over that, make sure that it's throughout, and you're using 10 to 12 point font. I recommend using 12, but for some reason if you want to use a smaller font, you can use that, but it has to be between 10 and 12. Your abstract, method, results, and discussion are all written in the passive first person, past tense. So that means you don't actually refer to yourself that often. You're able to refer to yourself as in we conducted sampling, but you don't use it continuously. You don't say that we as human beings are constantly destroying the earth. I have harmed the earth in this many ways. It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't actually show a lab report. It kind of seems more like journalism. So please use the first person, but use it limited in terms of referencing yourself, and it has to be past tense, always past tense. The only time when you're not using past tense is in the introduction when you're making predictions, because your predictions are in the future tense, in the sense of you are going to test for this and you think that this will happen. Make sense? So the last bit is spaces in many locations. A lot of you put way too many spaces or not nearly enough spaces. I found that the trend seems to be not enough spaces. For example, when you report a p-value, it's p-value, space equals space, and then the value after it. And then, for example, for measurements, it's 4.7, space 2, as in the hyphen, space 8.1, space centimeters. Spaces mean a lot, especially, I don't know why this happens a lot, but at the ends of periods, some of you begin a new sentence, and there's no space at the beginning of the sentence. A lot of journals actually require 2 spaces after a period, so the fact that you're not even putting 1 is just completely uncalled for. So please, add your spaces. So these are the most general comments I saw in the labs. I think if all of you better present your data and consider some of these things, you should all do exceptionally well next time. As for now, like I said, I marked the first lab report very easily. I think you all have done very well. The average seems to be between a mid 70, high 70s, so you guys shouldn't have too much to worry about. But in the future, I will be marking a little bit more strictly. So please consider all these things, and I want you all to do better for next time. If you have any specific questions or comments, you can email me, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And if you are confused about something, or if you want to talk through how to do your stats, or something to that effect, you can set up a meeting with me, and then I'd be more than happy to meet up with you. Alright, so hopefully this little session here helped you guys out, and I will see you all next week.